Namaskar and welcome to World Today. On the show this evening, the Indo-US relationship in the light of the visit of the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to India and the key outcomes of his meeting with the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and also other people of importance. Now, let's begin first with the headlines. Extensive bilateral talks between External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in New Delhi. Both leaders discuss a number of issues, including COVID, Afghanistan, Indo-Pacific. India underlines the importance of free and democratic Afghanistan. Jaishankar says that independence and sovereignty in Afghanistan will only be ensured if it is free from malign influences. And he says that Afghanistan must neither be a home to terrorism nor a source of refugees. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, agrees that for a peaceful resolution, the Taliban and the government have to come to the table, stresses that if the Taliban wants recognition on the global stage, they will have to respect human rights. And he says that taking over the country by force is not the right path to achieve this. The US issues a stern warning to adversaries over instances of cyber attacks. The US President Joe Biden says that attacks have the potential to lead to a real shooting war between the major nations. The US also engages allies in war games in Ukraine. COVID cases continue to surge in many countries of the world due to the highly virulent Delta variant. South Korea reports record new cases as Sydney extends its lockdown to tackle the surge. And the Delta surge has caused worries to experts in the US as well. The CDC now recommends fully vaccinated people have to wear masks indoors in areas with high transmission as the COVID-19 cases continue to rise and vaccination rates wane. Riding on COVID-induced pandemic situation, tech giants across the world register huge profits as increase in work from home and digital interface works to their advantage. The International Monetary Fund maintains a 6% global growth forecast for 2021, upgrading its outlook for the United States and other wealthy economies. A huge thumbs up for the Indian economy and its resilient nature. The IMF maintains India's ability to outperform all economies for 2 successive years. So let's begin as always with the main news. And the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, they held talks in New Delhi today. The leaders discussed a number of issues, including COVID, Indo-Pacific, climate change, Afghanistan. Addressing a joint press conference after that, the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said that the world wishes to see an independent, sovereign, democratic and stable Afghanistan at peace with itself and with its neighbors. However, he added that the independence and sovereignty in Afghanistan will only be ensured if it is free from malign influences. India stressed that the peace negotiations have to be taken seriously by all, and Afghanistan must neither be a home to terrorism nor a source of refugees.
Regarding Afghanistan, it is essential that peace negotiations are taken seriously by all parties. The world wishes to see an independent, sovereign, democratic and stable Afghanistan, at peace with itself and with its neighbors. But its independence and sovereignty will only be ensured if it is free from malign influences. Similarly, unilateral imposition of will by any party will obviously not be democratic and can never lead to stability. The gains to Afghan civil society, especially on the rights of women, minorities, and on social freedoms, over the last 2 decades are self-evident. We must collectively work to preserve them. Afghanistan must neither be home to terrorism nor a source of refugees.
The External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, and the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, they focused on the rapidly evolving situation in Afghanistan. India emphasized that the peace negotiations should be taken seriously and that in any settlement and solution, the diversity of Afghanistan has to be taken into account.
In terms of what we think about the situation, I think in the previous session, both Secretary and I made it very clear. We don't think outcomes should be decided by force on the battlefield. We think the peace negotiations should be a negotiation and should lead to peace. It should see cessation of violence. There should be a political settlement. So that is where we are looking at, and I think there is a broad consensus, deep consensus. Most of the neighbors of Afghanistan agree with that. Now, I grant you, not everybody who agrees does what they say they would do. I noted the exception which you have pointed out to. But I think that is a reality which is not new. That is a reality over the last 20 years.
On its part, the U.S. also agreed that there has to be a peaceful resolution to the Afghan problem and that the Taliban and the government have to come to the table.
Both committed to the proposition that there is no military solution to the conflict that afflicts Afghanistan. There has to be a peaceful resolution, which requires the Taliban and the Afghan government to come to the table. And we both agree, I think strongly, that any future government in Afghanistan has to be inclusive and fully representative of the Afghan people. But ultimately, this has to be an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process that we will all support. I think it's also accurate to say that there is largely agreement among most countries, both neighboring Afghanistan and in the region.
And Anthony Blinken also stressed that if the Taliban wants recognition in the world, they will have to respect human rights. He said that taking over the country by force and abusing the rights of the people is not the right path to achieve this.
An Afghanistan that does not respect the rights of its people, an Afghanistan that commits atrocities against its own people, would become a pariah state. The Taliban says that it seeks international recognition, that it wants international support for Afghanistan. Presumably it wants its leaders to be able to travel freely in the world, sanctions lifted, etc. Well, the taking over the country by force and abusing the rights of its people is not the path to achieve those objectives. There's only one path, and that's at the negotiating table to resolve the conflict peacefully and to have an Afghanistan emerge that is governed in a genuinely inclusive way and that's representative of all its people.
And Dr. Jaishankar also said that the Indo-Pacific, it presents us with different sets of challenges, challenges to stability, growth and prosperity.
The Indo-Pacific presents a different set of challenges to stability, growth and prosperity. Under the aegis of the Quad framework, we are engaged on maritime security, HADR, counter-terrorism, connectivity and infrastructure, cyber and digital concerns, COVID-19 response, climate action, education, and resilient and reliable supply chains. Our ability to work more closely, bilaterally, in the Quad and elsewhere, benefits the international community as a whole.
And Dr. Jaishankar conveyed India's commitment to a democratic transition as well as support for ASEAN initiatives. This is in Myanmar.
Developments in India's extended neighborhood are also naturally of great consequence to us. Stability in the Gulf, where our political, economic and community interests are so visible, was a shared concern. On Myanmar, I conveyed our commitment to its democratic transition as well as our support for ASEAN initiatives.
And the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that the Biden administration feels a deep personal commitment to make our friendship with India as strong and effective as it can be. And we believe this partnership will be critical in delivering stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Quoting him.
President Biden feels a deep personal commitment to making our friendship with India as strong and as effective as it can be. We believe this partnership will be critical for delivering stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond, and for showing the world how democracies can deliver for their people. And we believe that there's a good deal that we can accomplish together on so many fronts, including in the near term.
Well, thanking India for its support to the U.S. during the early days of COVID in the United States, Anthony Blinken announced that the U.S. government will be sending an additional $25 million support. And this is for vaccination efforts across our country.
We remember with gratitude, and we will not soon forget, the aid and assistance that India provided to us in the early days of COVID-19. I'm proud that we could help return the gesture of friendship. Over the past few months, the United States government has contributed more than $200 million to India for COVID-19 relief. And there's been a huge outpouring from individual Americans, from the private sector, in support as well. I'm pleased to announce that the United States government will send an additional $25 million to support vaccination efforts across India. This funding will contribute, I think, to saving lives by strengthening vaccine supply chain logistics, addressing misinformation and vaccine hesitancy, and helping to train more healthcare workers.
And Anthony Blinken also met the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval for over an hour. Both sides discussed strategic issues of importance. This is in the security as well as defense, economic and technology sectors. Special attention was on long-term measures to take the relationship to the next level. Views were also exchanged on contemporary as well as futuristic issues related to regional and global security. And for a perspective on this, we are joined by two important guests. Let me introduce you to them. Alok Bansal is a strategic affairs expert and director at the India Foundation. And Mohan Kumar is former ambassador of India, former senior diplomat, and currently the chairman of Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, what are your takeaways from this important meeting today?
So thank you very much for having me. Let me begin with a couple of observations. I think it's significant that while Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, is in India, you have his deputy currently in China.
Yes.
And that gives you a sense of the importance that is attached. I cannot remember a time like this ever in the last 20, 25 years. That's the first. The second, I see this as a continuation of the intensive exchanges that have happened between India and the United States last 6 months. Barely a month has gone by without a virtual meeting, physical meeting in the margins of important conferences and so on. So I think this is high-level exchange at its very best. Lastly, I would say that the scope of strategic convergence between United States and India is now so intense and so close that we are now really seeing, except perhaps for the trade front, in every other area, I see massive strategic convergence between the two countries. And this latest meeting of the Secretary of State is further illustration of the growing strategic convergence between the United States and India.
So, Mr. Bansal, so the fundamentals, the convergences are strong, but, you know, the concerns are also quite many. With regard to Afghanistan, would you say that, the two countries have made the right kind of statement today? Or would you, because the issue is that both sides are looking at political solutions to the problem in Afghanistan, but what pressure can be put to bring that about?
I think the emphasis in the two statements is important because we need to understand while there is an agreement that we need democratic stability in Afghanistan, what the US Secretary of State said that if the Taliban wants to be accepted in the Global Committee of Nations, it will have to respect human rights and things like that. He did not say that US in any way would want to stall Taliban's capturing of power, which is a major concern for us, though he made the statements to that extent. And I think the subtle difference in the emphasis on Afghanistan is important. I think the most significant factor in this particular visit, which is of concern to India, is Afghanistan. On all other issues, I think there is a broad consensus. We are talking about an open and free Indo-Pacific where freedom of navigation is assured.
Yes.
Both democratic countries want to come closer. Quad needs to be strengthened. We are making the right noise for everything else. I think a greater collaboration as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned is being talked of. Even against COVID, the two countries are collaborating and
yes.
hope to collaborate and be in the forefront of fighting this particular pandemic. And what Blinken said about India's help to the US in the initial stages and how they have reciprocated it, etc. It's all the right noise. I think the major focus that would remain, and I think that must have been discussed with NSA and others, is going to be Afghanistan because Afghanistan does pose a concern to India.
Indeed. So, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, let's discuss Afghanistan then a little bit, because what the External Affairs Minister said is that, they have to accept whatever's happened, the countries in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, and work with what they have. And that's what the countries are doing. But India's interests in Afghanistan were largely developmental, and peace is crucial for development, isn't it? And the peace factor now is at stake, with the Taliban on the rise, affecting India's interests to a large extent. And also this, the developments of the Taliban gaining importance in Afghanistan also spill over into Pakistan support. And then once again, that concern about fundamentalism and where it can lead all over the region.
Yes, I totally concede that Afghanistan is a conundrum. It's a difficult issue. I would like to just make 2 points, which is that first, nobody can be surprised that the United States is withdrawing. I think they have been hinting to this effect for the last at least couple of years, but perhaps even earlier. You cannot expect a country to stay 20 years and spend more and more money and so on. Having said that, this does pose very severe problems for India. For 2 reasons. One, I think we have massive investments now in Afghanistan, and we would like to protect their assets. We also have tremendous goodwill in Afghanistan. So I see the situation evolving in a very different way, in the sense that I feel that India has got or clawed its way back in Afghanistan. We've clawed our way back. I don't think we are without influence or voice in Afghanistan today. But having said that, there is no doubt that there is a little bit of divergence in the United States and India, because the US is thinking of withdrawing. And for India, that withdrawal will lead to a vacuum, which could well be filled by Taliban. Having said that, I think the statement of Tony Blinken that if Taliban doesn't want to be a pariah, it has to get acceptance in the international community and accept human rights, appears to me a kind of a carrot that is being dangled in front of the Taliban. I think it is not going to be easy for Taliban either, because in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China, Russia, they all have their interests, which are not very different from India's interests, at least vis-a-vis Taliban. Pakistan's case may be different, but otherwise, for the vast majority of the international community, the establishment of a caliphate and a Sharia law by Taliban in
Yes.
Afghanistan does not meet their approval. So
Okay.
India will have to work very hard with other players and
Yes.
try to see whether we can craft an outcome in Afghanistan that will at least substantially, if not fully, meet our concerns. That would be my view.
Indeed, Mr. Bansal, with regard to the rise of fundamentalism and the possible export of terrorism as a result of that, is that a concern that people are worried about? Because, well, I mean, the U.S. doesn't seem to be so concerned about it, because perhaps there is a deal that the U.S. is not going to be ever hurt once again to that extent like they were hit in September 11 of 2001. So, yeah, go ahead, sir.
Let one thing be clear, that Taliban has shown in last few days itself that it doesn't abide by any agreements. So if US believes that just because Taliban has given them certain assurances, it will not be hit, I think it is going to be their big mistake. Secondly, having said that, there is no doubt, I agree with Ambassador Mohan Kumar that everybody should have known that US will withdraw. They had stayed for too long. There was a war weariness. The public opinion in US wanted soldiers back. But they could have done it in a little better way.
Okay.
The way eventually they are pulling out, they have actually weakened the Afghan government by bypassing it initially while negotiating with Taliban, and subsequently by making noises which have actually created disruption in Afghanistan. Because in Afghanistan, traditionally, the regimes have changed because the key commanders have changed sides, because Afghans by nature have been fence sitters. Most of the wars have actually been won or lost by key commanders shifting their allegiance, and which is actually impacted by the psychological or impression that is created. Now, what actually happened was that as soon as US started withdrawing and made that sort of noise, there was actually initially a perception that the Afghan government is crumbling, and that gave Taliban a head start.
Okay.
But now that Afghan government is standing, and now US has at least made a commitment that economically they will support the government, I'm sure this government is competent enough to withstand any Taliban offensive.
Indeed.
Having said that,
Sure.
if Taliban, however, captures power, it is going to be a serious issue, because Taliban has a relationship with Al-Qaeda, which, despite their assertions, will never be snapped. Because Al-Qaeda wants to wage a jihad under Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan under Mullah Akhundzada. And if Afghanistan falls to Taliban, it will create a theocratic stage which will try and export this ideology not only in this region but across the globe. So initially we are going to be affected the most, probably all the countries in the neighborhood, but eventually the globe will have to pay a price if Taliban comes to power in Kabul.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar, nation states, they gain a greater prominence because of economic power as well as military might. And now when we look at proper types of groupings like the Quad, for instance. Now, what do you see? I mean, the purposes of the Quad also were quite well articulated by the two principals today. What would you think? I mean, is the Quad going to be, extremely important in the next 10 to 15 years in also dealing with other challenges that are emerging perhaps from the, the vacuum that has been created in Afghanistan and, what you all are talking about, which could lead to instability in the larger world?
I couldn't agree more with you on the importance of Quad. I mean, look back a few years and see what the Chinese foreign minister said when Quad was thought of. He said it is like sea foam and it will dissipate in no time.
Okay.
And today, China is forced to reckon with Quad. So I see Quad as a tremendous success story in building regional institutional architecture among like-minded nations to deal with a whole gamut of challenges like climate change, cybersecurity, maritime security, resilient infrastructure, vaccines, public health, you name it. Quad is going to be the hub in this region, at least in Indo-Pacific. There is a very strong feeling, for example, in ASEAN and other places, that the United States under the Biden administration appears to pay more importance to Quad than to the other countries of East Asia. And on the face of it, that is not a very inaccurate assessment. because
Yes.
the number of meetings that have happened at the summit level, at the foreign ministers level, at other official level on Quad is quite extraordinary in the last couple of years. So I completely agree with you that the Quad will provide the hub in a hub and spoke system of regional infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, ASEAN will continue to be central, but I do believe the Quad has an extraordinarily important role to play. And here I think it is the role of United States, India, and other countries which will turn to be very important. So an important part of today's consultations also
Sure.
concerned Quad. And I would not be surprised at all if there is also the security dimension which was discussed between Secretary
Sure.
of State Blinken and the National Security Advisor.
Let me take that up with Mr. Bansal. What do you think is the importance of that meeting with the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval? And also, you know that the United States' President Joe Biden has told some countries of the world that are utilizing cyber warfare, that could actually become real warfare. Because there is a limit to what cyber warfare can do, and we can see that we've talked a little bit about one type of instability, but the cyber world creating instability in the larger world is also a matter of grave concern.
There is no doubt his meeting with NSA would have discussed certain issues which are of great importance to both the countries. Of course, besides Afghanistan, which is of importance to both the countries, we would have discussed what happened on Sino-Indian border last year, which has been a very, very significant development. And in fact, the Secretary of State before coming had said that he would like to discuss Sino-Indian standoff along line of actual control. So that would have been discussed because that is of importance. US has been supportive of India's stance. And besides this, of course, the cyber warfare would have been discussed because this is a very, very important facet. Because cyber attacks have the capability of destabilizing countries. There have been cases where countries' central banks have been robbed, where electricity grid have actually cracked down, where even nuclear plants have been targeted by cyber attacks. And now these cyber attacks will have impact which could be catastrophic. So it is but natural for a country to react as if a physical attack has been launched against it. And I think what President Biden has actually communicated is that a lot of countries believe that they can get away by a cyber attack, but the cyber attack needs to be dealt with in a manner that any other attack on a country's sovereignty or territory needs to be dealt with, because cyber attack could trigger even a bigger loss of economic might, as well as in some cases it could even result in casualties if actually there are some issues. So one has to deal with it like any other attack on one's sovereignty is concerned. And I think by saying so, US President has actually warned China and other countries which have been indulging in this sort of covert activities that they better watch out. Otherwise, this could be catastrophic for them as well.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar and Mr. Alok Bansal, for your inputs and insights. Now, moving on then to our next story, and this is a story that I just referred to. In fact, the US President Joe Biden has fired a warning salvo to his adversaries at the cyber attacks that have the potential to lead to a real war, a real shooting war between the major nations. Now, his comments came as cyber attacks have riled the US way beyond companies that were targeted, and Biden's comments were in fact directed at apparently Russia. Tensions between these two countries simmer, and the US forces are actually engaged in a military drill in Ukraine, Russia's neighbor, with a history of land disputes with it.
Cybersecurity issues and other matters are increasing tensions between the US on one side and China and Russia on the other. Now the matters seem to have crossed a certain threshold for US to issue a warning shot. US President Joe Biden has warned that a significant cyber attack on the United States could lead to a real shooting war with a major power. Comments that highlight what Washington sees as growing threats posed by Russia and China. Biden made the remark during a visit to the office of the Director of National Intelligence in McLean, Virginia. Cybersecurity has risen to the top of the agenda for the Biden administration after a series of high-profile attacks on entities hurt the US far beyond just the companies hacked. Some of the attacks affected fuel and food supplies in parts of the United States.
But I think it's more likely we're going to end up if we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach of great consequence. And it's increasing exponentially, the capabilities. When I was with Mr. Putin, who has a real problem, he's sitting on top of an economy that has nuclear weapons and oil wells and nothing else. Nothing else. Their economy is, what, the 8th smallest in the world now? Largest in the world? He knows he's in real trouble, which makes him even more dangerous in my view.
Biden's remarks were directed primarily at Russia, and he referred to Russian President Vladimir Putin with apparent sarcasm as "my very close friend." Biden also accused Russia of spreading disinformation about the 2022 American midterm elections, which he said was a pure violation of our sovereignty.
And I just had an interesting meeting, as you all know, with my very close friend Vladimir Putin. I can tell, the one thing, I've been dealing with world leaders a long, long time. And just like all of you women and men, you can sort of sense somebody else after a while. He knows that you're better than his team, and it bothers the hell out of him. Not a joke. Not a joke.
The threats of retaliation against cyber attacks are not the only issue that is literally pitting the superpowers against each other across the line in Ukraine. The roar of attack helicopters, armored personnel firing by soldiers is echoing a different buzz in the region. The diplomatic and strategic message intended by this large military exercise, hosted by Ukraine and also involving the United States, Poland and Lithuania, is not lost on anyone. The drills, called the Three Swords 2021, will involve more than 1,200 servicemen and more than 200 combat vehicles and will last from July 17th to 30th in Lviv region. The drills come amid increased tensions between NATO and Moscow, which said in June it had fired warning shots and dropped bombs in the path of a British warship to chase it out of Black Sea waters off the coast of Crimea. Relations between Kyiv and Moscow plummeted after Russia seized Crimea and over Russia's support for separatist forces in the conflict in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Ukraine and the United States in June held a separate military exercise, Sea Breeze, involving more than 30 countries in the Black Sea and southern Ukraine, despite Russian calls for the drills to be cancelled. World Today Desk, DD India.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman will lead the U.S. delegation at the nuclear arms control talks with Russia in Geneva today. Now, during the first top-level meeting last month between the two nuclear powers since President Joe Biden had taken office, he and the Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to restart these talks, known as the U.S.-Russia Strategic Stability Dialogue. It's aimed at reducing the risk of nuclear war. Sherman will be joined by the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, Bonnie Jenkins. The Russians will be represented by the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Rakyabov. And USA's call for mandatory masks, it comes as a U-turn since the Delta strain is gaining momentum. In guidance issued earlier this month, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention they recommended all students, teachers and staff at schools from kindergarten through to the 12th grade. They wear masks regardless of whether they were vaccinated or not.
The Delta variant is forcing the strongest nations to have a rethink on their COVID strategies, and the United States is not an exception. Not long ago, US President Joe Biden wanted Americans to celebrate as he declared the nation's independence from the virus, and the White House even encouraged gatherings and fireworks displays all around the country to mark the Independence Day on 4th of July. Now the virus surge has forced a sensible rethink, and that too in time. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has now recommended that fully vaccinated people also wear masks indoors in areas with high transmission as COVID-19 cases continue to rise and vaccination rates wane. In toughening of guidance issued earlier this month, the CDC also recommended all students, teachers and staff at schools for kindergarten through 12th grade to wear masks regardless of whether they were vaccinated.
When you have vaccinated people who might have a breakthrough infection, and we know now as a fact, as a scientific fact, that they can transmit the virus to an uninfected person. It's for that reason that the CDC made the change in recommendation and did just as you correctly stated, namely that if you are vaccinated, if you are in an indoor setting, you should still wear a mask.
In the meantime, US President Joe Biden's administration is weighing whether to require federal employees to be vaccinated as the highly contagious Delta variant spreads. This is another surprise move for the administration, as it has previously discouraged federal agencies from requiring vaccination for on-site work.
We have a pandemic because of the unvaccinated, and there's so much enormous confusion. And the more we learn about this virus and the Delta variation, the more we have to be worried and concerned. And then only one thing we know for sure: if those other 100 million people got vaccinated, we'd be in a very different world. So get vaccinated. If you haven't, you're not nearly as smart as I said you were.
White House has said that it will continue to evaluate infection rates in different locations, that the president will visit and follow the CDC guidance that applies to a particular area. Meanwhile, fearing another lockdown, New Yorkers are in wide support for the revised recommendations. What they say is a good idea because it's better safe than sorry.
I think it's a good idea because it's better safe than sorry. You know, you never know what happens, so I think it's a good idea.
Okay, you don't have a mask?
I don't because I can't keep masks, but if I had a mask, I'd wear it. Yeah.
I think it's the right thing to do. I mean, with the Delta variant, it seems like people who are vaccinated are getting breakthrough cases and stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. I think it's the right thing to put masks back on.
I think that it's a step forward in that situation where rates are going up again, because we don't want to all get into lockdown again because some people don't want to get vaccinated. If you're vaccinated, then okay, if you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear your mask. But if you're not and your rates are getting higher, like I suggest either get vaccinated or continue to wear your mask, because you can't win both ways, and we all want life to go back to how it was prior to the pandemic.
The United States continues to lead the world in the daily average number of new infections, accounting for 1 in every 9 cases reported worldwide each day. With 49.1% of the nation fully vaccinated, US is still a long way from herd immunity, made more difficult by the rapid spread of the Delta variant, which now accounts for 83% of the cases nationwide. World Today, DD India.
Well, worldwide, the COVID-19 cases, they continue to rise as the nations are struggling with a sudden surge of the Delta variant. South Korea reported 1,896 new cases on Tuesday, its highest ever daily increase, as the country struggles to subdue a 4th wave of outbreaks fanned by the more contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus. The daily tally broke a previous record set on July 22 as infections are spreading beyond the capital Seoul and its neighboring regions, where the toughest social distancing rules are in place. Tighter social distancing curbs took effect across most of the country on Tuesday, and these will last for 2 weeks. Those areas will be under level 3 curbs on a 4-level scale, which will mean a 10 p.m. dining curfew and a ban on gatherings of more than 4 people. The greater Seoul area, it remains under level 4, and that includes a ban on gatherings of more than 2 people after 6 p.m. Well, the pandemic continues to hang over the Tokyo Olympics, particularly after the host city announced a record number of new cases on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the Tokyo Olympics organizers reported 16 new games-related COVID-19 cases, bringing the disclosed total to 169 as the Games enters its 6th day. There were no new cases of infection within the Olympics athletes' village. The 16 were mostly Japan residents related to the Games. Now, though the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga shut down any possibility of cancelling the Olympics, organizers are likely to remain on high alert for any breach of its bubble, where athletes and others involved with the Games, they avoid any social contact. Tokyo is already under its 4th state of emergency, and it's set to run until after the Olympics. And the Australian city of Sydney has extended a lockdown by 4 weeks on Wednesday after an already protracted stay-at-home order failed to douse a COVID-19 outbreak, with authorities warning of tougher policing to stamp out non-compliance. Far from a planned exit from the lockdown in 3 days, the city of 5 million people and neighbouring regional areas spanning about 200 kilometres of coastline, they were told to stay home until August 28, following persistently high case numbers since a flare-up of the Delta variant began last month. The state of New South Wales reported 177 new cases for Tuesday, and that's the biggest increase since an unmasked, unvaccinated airport driver was said to have sparked the current outbreak. Authorities have cautioned that active community transmission must be near zero before relaxing the rules. Very tough rules there in Australia. Mexico City on Tuesday started to vaccinate young people between the ages of 18 and 29, seeking to reverse the rise in cases of COVID-19 in the capital city. Now, from the break of dawn, thousands of youngsters, they showed up at vaccination centers to be immunized, and the process went quite smoothly. City authorities have realized many of the new infections in the city, they are among people who are under the age of 40. So high infection rates also have to do with the fact that the youngsters have relaxed health measures and are more socially active than the older people. COVID-19 hospitalizations in Mexico City and its suburbs, which are home to about 21 million people, as big as Delhi and Mumbai, increased by a third in the last week amid a third wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Mexico has been going through its third wave of the pandemic since early June. 4 police officers on Tuesday told the U.S. lawmakers that they were beaten, taunted with racial insults, and thought that they might die as they struggled to defend the U.S. Capitol on January 6 against a mob that was supporting the then President Donald Trump. But during a 3.5-hour congressional hearing, they also criticized the Republican lawmakers who have sought to downplay this attack. It was a dramatic first hearing for a Democratic-led House of Representatives committee, which is tasked with investigating what they consider one of the worst violence that's seen in the United States. At the end of a hearing, when the 4 officers were each asked by the committee chairman to tell the committee what they each would like to see come out of this congressional probe, this is what they had to say.
To describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that.
Well, as we can see, this is what the man said. He said that a hitman goes to jail, but not only does the hitman, in fact, go to jail, but the person who is, in fact, he is there. Let's listen to something else now. The next person, what he had to say.
Academy, we learn about time, place, and circumstance in investigating potential crimes and those who may have committed them. And so the time, the place, and the circumstances of that rally, that rhetoric, and those events, to me, leads in the direction of our president and other members, not only of Congress and the Senate, but that is what I am looking for, is an investigation into those actions and activities which may have resulted in the events of January 6th, and also whether or not there was collaboration between those members, their staff, and these terrorists.
One of the scariest things about January 6th is that the people that were there, even to this day, think that they were right. They think that they were right, and that makes for a scary recipe for the future of this country. So I think that's why it's very important that you all take this committee seriously and get to the bottom of why this happened, and let's make it never happen again.
Moving on then, the global COVID crisis has forced economies to pause and has presented businesses with a unique opportunity to use challenges to their benefit. And with everyone staying at home, the tech giants, they've flourished as they turned this crisis into an opportunity. And technology and digital reach has enhanced because of advertisements. Tech giants like Google and Apple have gained in quantity of business, and their profits have actually gone up quite considerably. Look at this report.
The COVID-19 pandemic might have hurt economies worldwide, but the tech companies have been unaffected. On the contrary, due to increased insistence on work from home and digital interface, their revenues have soared. The US tech companies are leading the bunch. Huge tech companies Apple and Alphabet, Google's parent company, have reported quarterly results that have beaten analysts' expectations. Fueled by a rise in advertising spending, as more consumers shopped online, Google's parent Alphabet's quarterly revenue and profit surged to record highs. Shares of Alphabet rose 5% in extending traded. Alphabet said revenue from Google advertising rose nearly 70% to $50.44 billion. Ad revenue for the company's streaming video platform YouTube jumped 83.7% from the year-ago quarter to $7 billion as advertisers continued to use the site to reach viewers at home amid the pandemic. Total revenue of the internet's biggest supplier of search and video ads rose 61.6% to $61.88 billion, well above Wall Street estimates of $56.16 billion. Meanwhile, Apple just posted its strongest June quarter ever, with a near doubling of profits and a huge revenue beat for its iPhone business. Apple gained as consumers bought premium versions of its 5G iPhones and signed up for the company's subscription services. Driven by better than expected iPhone sales, total revenue hit $81.43 billion, which was above analyst expectations of $73.30 billion. The digital ad market is booming, with consumers shifting to shopping largely online because of the coronavirus pandemic, leading companies to rely on data gathered from customers' orders and online activity to launch new products and know their market better. With agency inputs, DD India.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday, that's July the 27th, they maintained their 6% global growth forecast for 2021. This is an upgrade in its outlook for the United States and other wealthy countries. And it also maintained India's ability to outperform other economies for 2 successive years. Let's take a look at this report.
Access to vaccines has emerged as a major factor for economies struggling due to COVID-19 induced measures. The nations that can manage mass inoculations and cope with the surge will have a better chance of bouncing back on the economic front. The International Monetary Fund has maintained a 6% global growth forecast for 2021, upgrading its outlook for the United States and other wealthy economies, but cutting estimates for a number of developing countries struggling with surging COVID-19 infections. The divergence is based largely on better access to COVID-19 vaccines and continued fiscal support in advanced economies, while emerging markets face difficulties on both fronts, the IMF said in an update to its World Economic Outlook.
Now, these revisions reflect, to an important extent, differences in pandemic developments as the Delta variant takes over. Now, close to 40% of the population in advanced economies has been fully vaccinated, compared with 11% in emerging market economies and a tiny fraction in low-income developing countries. Faster than expected vaccination rates and return to normalcy have led to upgrades, while renewed waves of COVID-19 cases in some countries, notably India, have led to downgrades.
The IMF significantly raised its forecast for the United States, which it now expects to grow at 7% in 2021 and 4.9% in 2022, up 0.6 and 1.4 percentage points respectively from the forecasts in April. The projections assume the US Congress will approve President Joe Biden's roughly $4 trillion in proposed infrastructure, education and family support spending largely as envisioned by the White House. Despite the pandemic-induced lockdowns and restrictions, IMF has maintained the resilience of India's economy as it expects India to be among the fastest-growing economies for 2 consecutive fiscals, that's 2021-22 and 2022-23. The strong response to COVID pandemic and India's solid presence in pharma and vaccine manufacturing seem to be the key factors that have worked for the Indian economy. With agency inputs, DD India.
Well, it's time now for some offbeat, unique and different stories. This is our segment called Beyond the Headlines.
The United Nations has added the world's oldest mummification technique, which was developed by the Chinchorro culture located in present-day Chile, to UNESCO's World Heritage List. Along with the mummies, the World Heritage Committee also included 3 Chinchorro settlements including Colón 10, the northern skirts of Morro de Arica and Cameroon's estuary. According to UNESCO, the Chinchorro culture developed their mummification process 3,000 years before the Egyptians did. One of the earliest mummification techniques consisted in skinning the body before removing all the organs and muscles. Then, the body was dried and filled with dirt, feathers, wool and plants. The extremities were reconstructed with clay. The Van Gogh Alive, the experience has opened in Munich after being postponed for a number of times due to COVID-19, with many calling it the best visited multimedia exhibit in the world with 6 million visitors to the date. Featuring some of Van Gogh's best known works, the exhibition that also toured many other cities around the world is not only a feast for the eyes but also the senses, with music and smells to accompany the colorful projections. Getting older can be amazing. Contestants in the Miss Texas Senior America pageant are a living testimony to it. Aged between 60 to 75 years, these women are bending the rules of society and redefining beauty for everyone. Contestants are being judged on their unique talent, for sword dancing to baton twirling and one-handed push-ups, as well as their philosophy of life. Is your feline friend looking a bit down in the dumps? Cats aren't the best at letting you know when something is wrong. But a new app powered by artificial intelligence claimed it can decode the subtle facial cues of kitties to deliver a speedy assessment of their well-being. The app, called Tably, developed by calorie-based developers, uses the pain assessment for cats based on ear position, orbital tightening or eye narrowing, muscle tensions, whiskers change and head position to determine their mood. Who doesn't like a plate full of French fries? This dish made of potato has gained huge popularity over the years, so much so that a restaurant in New York is selling a special French fries covered in 23-karat gold dust for a whopping amount of $200 per plate. Served at New York City famous Serendipity 3 restaurant, these are the world's most expensive French fries according to the Guinness World Records. This is Serendipity's 10th Guinness World Record. All Who Worthy project, which monitors polluted regions in the Brazilian state of Rio de Janeiro, is looking to repopulate mangroves in the oceanic Guanabara Bay. Their objective is to clear rubbish and reforest an estimated area of 750,000 square kilometers. This equals to 75 football fields. Mangrove forests usually grow in tropical and subtropical regions. They are formed by mangrove trees which grow in low oxygen soil and create a transition area between marine and terrestrial zones. Amid the shortage of petroleum products throughout the world, a man in Kenya is providing hope. Dominic Kahumbu, an entrepreneur, along with his team, is turning water wheat into clean cooking fuel. The man is taking water hyacinth on the Kenyan shores of Lake Victoria, and with the help of a machine made by his company Biogas International, he is converting water wheat into clean cooking fuel. The project, in partnership with drug maker AstraZeneca and the Institute for Sustainability Leadership at the University of Cambridge, has provided the digesters to 50 families in Kenya's western city, Kisumu. In In Sri Lanka, world's largest star sapphire cluster has been found in a backyard. The cluster weighs around 510 kilograms or 2.5 million carats and has been named the Serendipity Sapphire by the authorities. Experts say the stone, which is pale blue in color, has estimated value of up to $100 million in the international market. Authorities say they have already got around 50 inquiries from foreign buyers to the world's largest star sapphire cluster. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, it's time to wind up our show now, but before that, we leave you with these lightning glimpses of drones flying in the air. The British drone display company Celestial, it flies as many as 300 drones in formation. Celestial's credits include recreating Pablo Picasso's iconic dove flying over Sydney and several other global cities to celebrate Amnesty International's 60th anniversary. We leave you with that. Thanks very much for being with us. Namaskar.